With so much talk of terror and reaction to terror, let's turn our attention back to that simmering Cold War that seems to be taking place between India and Canada, ever since Justin Trudeau made his extraordinary accusation of having credible allegations linking India to the death of a Khalistani activist in Canada. Now, several developments have taken place over the past few days. India has restarted the visa process, which is being seen as a possible indication of some sort of a thaw. But on the other hand, Canada has been forced to withdraw 41 diplomats on grounds of parity. That led to a doubling down by Justin Trudeau, who promptly accused India of violating the Vienna Convention. In a sign of Anglosphere solidarity, the US, the UK, Australia and New Zealand seem to support that stance by Canada. India reacted angrily by saying that the Vienna Convention allows receiving countries to specify a fair number of diplomats and that there's no violation of the Vienna Convention taking place at all, certainly not on India's side. Look, this entire situation isn't going away anytime soon, and there are some indications that further escalations could take place, like India potentially taking Canada to international bodies for supporting terrorism. That could be on the cards. Now, why is all of this happening? Look at the state of the world. The war in Ukraine, the war between Israel and Gaza, the threat of Chinese aggression in East Asia, the emergence of a powerful anti-Western axis between China, Russia and Iran. The last thing that the West probably wanted was a major crisis with India, thanks to a still unsubstantiated allegation made by this man, Justin Trudeau. It's frankly not what India wanted either, but I can tell you one thing. I strongly doubt that India will be ready or able to blink on this issue. And that's probably something that the West should keep in mind. Why, you ask? Well, actually, that question was repeatedly asked to me on a recent trip to the United States, including by many seasoned India watchers. They were all somewhat surprised by the very hardline Indian response to Canada. And this is what I told them. I told them it's not about Niger. It's about the attitude of countries like Canada to terrorists who target India and Indian interests. And that includes Indian diplomats. Look, terror is a red line for India. It is a red line for many countries around the world. I mean, look at the way that America and most countries in the West are responding to the Hamas terror attack on Israel. That includes Justin Trudeau, by the way. Take a look at his reaction. They all say Israel has a right to defend itself against terror. That's why they are supporting the strikes on Gaza, strikes that have killed thousands and thousands of civilians. It's terror, they say. It must be dealt with. It was the same stance when it came to Afghanistan, to Syria, to ISIS, to Iraq. You get the picture. Now, India asks, and has been asking for a long time, where do those principles go when it comes to terror that targets India? Now, it has to be said that the West has finally become sensitive to Islamist or jihadi terrorism that targets India. Groups like the Lashkar-e-Toiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed, they have been referred to, even in recent statements by American leaders, for example, they're talking about the Lashkar-e-Toiba and groups like that. And that may well be because jihadi terrorism affects the West as well. But let's not forget, there are other forms of terror too. And let's talk directly about Khalistani terrorism. A lot of people died as a result of Khalistani terror. 20,000, 22,000, something like that in the 80s and 90s. A lot of people died. And yes, it is a big deal in India, including in the Punjab. You can imagine how much it angers Indians when people seek to revive that, especially when those people aren't even in India. They are stirring up trouble in India from safe havens and comfortable homes in places like Canada or the UK or the US for that matter. Punjab itself, you must remember, is peaceful. No one wants Khalistan there. No one wants a return to those bad days of terrorism and violence. These are outsiders seeking to restart that bloodshed all over again. No wonder there is such a strong Indian reaction when countries like Canada just turn a blind eye to that terrorism. And it's not just today. It's been happening for 40 years. You all know the story of how Canadian negligence, quite frankly, led to the blowing up of an Air India plane. And then the accused getting away. Slap on the wrist. That was 35 years ago, and all of that happened under the watch of Justin Trudeau's father. And that's why India will not and should not back down in this particular confrontation with Canada, because there is a principle here. Terror is terror. No ifs and buts. If you're concerned about terror that could target you, then you need to take all terror seriously. And that brings me to the rule of law. Canada says that the rule of law prevents targeted assassinations. The rule of law says that extrajudicial executions are wrong. They're a crime. Okay, that's fair enough. But then another question has to be asked. What then does the rule of law say about giving shelter to terrorists and extremists, and giving them shelter for 40 long years? There is an inconsistency and a double standard here that has to be called out, and it needs to be addressed. And let's take this further to these statements we've heard from Canada, for example, about the Vienna Convention.
The actions that the government of India took this week are themselves contrary to international law. The government of India decided to unilaterally revoke the diplomatic immunity of 40 Canadian diplomats in India. This is a violation of the Vienna Convention governing diplomacy.
Now, two things come to mind. Number one, India has responded by very clearly saying that the Vienna Convention doesn't say anything about the number of diplomats who should be in place. In fact, it sort of leaves it up to the receiving country to specify what is a fair number of diplomats that they should be there. And therefore, India is saying that Trudeau and the other Five Eyes are frankly quite wrong in their claim that India is violating the Vienna Convention in any way. But more importantly, here is a question that needs to be asked. At its core, the Vienna Convention is about the protection of diplomats, their safety, and how that can be guaranteed by host nations. Now, if you take a look at any of these videos by people like the SJF's Pannu, look at what he is saying. He is directly inciting violence against Indian diplomats. There are posters being put up in Canada asking for the assassination of Indian diplomats. There are floats being paraded on the streets in Canada celebrating the death of an Indian Prime Minister. How is any of this even remotely compatible with either the rule of law or with the Vienna Convention? Quite frankly, it isn't. And if you think these are just empty words and you shouldn't take them seriously, they aren't. Indian embassies, consulates and high commissions have been repeatedly physically attacked by Khalistanis this year in just the last few months. And not just in Canada. These, for example, are scenes from the infamous attack in London on the Indian High Commission. And here is the Indian High Commissioner talking to me a little earlier this year from that very spot about genuine concerns about the safety of Indian diplomats.
There was a group of about 25 or 30 people who came, and obviously it had been pre-planned. They had cameras and so on and so forth, and they scaled the balcony and were in the process of lowering the flag and trying to hand it over to their crew to desecrate it and to put up a Khalistani flag. And our security guys climbed into the balcony. And
he actually came out and grabbed it back, which is a brave guy. I'd love to meet him and shake his hand at some point.
Well, you can only shake one hand because they managed to break his other arm in 3 places.
Did they?
Yeah, with lathis.
I could go on and on, but you get the drift. This India-Canada issue is not going to go away soon, and it may well vitiate relations with others in the Anglosphere as well. And that's because terror, and Khalistani terror in particular in this case, is a red line to India. And India will expect Western countries to do something about it. And that's why the language being used by India for Canada in recent weeks Well, it may have surprised many people. And yes, I have only heard that language being used for one other country, and that's Pakistan. And that's the other country that India accuses of being a safe haven for terror. Now, Pakistan and Canada being spoken about in the same breath as safe havens for terror, that should probably outrage many people in Canada. That should upset many people in Canada, and that should worry Trudeau and Canada. And if it does, and it does worry them, then quite frankly, the onus is on them to do something about it, because that's the first step, and that's the first step that will lead to a resolution of this particular impasse.